Unit 7, Period 7, Section 8. Today we're going to talk about the causes and consequences of the Great Depression. The first cause of the Great Depression that you need to be familiar with is overproduction. And you have to understand the period of time that occurred before the stock market crashed. From 1914 to 1918, the world was at war. 1917 to 1918, the United States entered the war. Wars cost a lot of money, and the government's a very good purchaser of products while a war is going on. So the United States economy really grew tremendously during World War One and after the conclusion of World War One. And so therefore, as stated in the previous section, the economic cycle of the United States was at a peak. And agriculturally and industrially, the United States was producing at a very high rate. Here you can see wheat prices during World War One and how they grew. But then you can see after the wars concluded that wheat prices dropped a lot as Europeans began to produce wheat on their own, which they weren't able to do while the war was going on. And here you can see women working in a factory at full production, and that's during World War One. And here you can see all the consumer goods, because what you have is a consumer economy after World War One. The men did not spend a lot of money while World War One was going on because they were fighting in the war. The women were left here at home working their jobs and saving for their futures. And when the men returned home, many men married these ladies and they had lots of children. And really the women were sort of forced back into the home. And when they went back into the home, they did not want to go back in and do all the manual types of labor that had existed before. They wanted washing machines and they wanted refrigerators and they wanted electric stoves. And so you have what's called consumerism in the 1920s, and Americans began to mix up the idea of, get confused, the idea of needs versus wants. And here, as an advertisement for going from an ice box to in this case, a Frigidaire, which would be an electric refrigerator or freezer. One of the consequences of overproduction during this time period in the Midwestern part of the United States was called the Dust Bowl, because farmers had produced at such a high rate and prices for their products were so high while World War One was going on. Many of these farmers bought more and more land in the Midwest, and many of them overproduced. And eventually, with the combination of high winds and drought and these farmers overproducing, you see scenes like this where the topsoil in the Midwestern states begins to get blown away. And this is the effect of that. A lot of farmers lost their ability to grow their crops and things like that. And this is really the center in this map here of what the Dust Bowl was. Another cause of the Great Depression was underconsumption. This is by consumers. So in the first cause of the Great Depression, it was overproduction by producers. Second cause of the Great Depression is underconsumption by consumers. And one reason this was caused is before and during World War One, the American government had placed tariffs on foreign products coming into our country before we had entered World War One, so our manufacturers could compete against European competition. Well, as we've learned in previous units, tariffs cause higher prices, and this caused over a long period of time caused American consumers to consume less. So you've got our companies in America producing at high rates, but our consumers are purchasing at low rates. Another reason is low wages. American workers, because of the effects of the Gilded Age and things like that, we're seeing had begun to see lower and lower wages. So that if you put the idea of American workers working at low wages and prices being high because of government protections on American industry called tariffs, then you can see the quandary. And then the third cause of the Great Depression was called speculation. Speculation in this case is defined as buying stocks on the chance of a quick profit. I liken this to purchasing tickets in the lottery. The more tickets that are purchased by consumers in the lottery, the higher the reward is, the prize is on a lottery. Well, as the prize gains in its value, more people buy tickets. And so the purchasing of tickets and the value of the lottery go hand in hand. This is much like the way the stock market works. Here's a newspaper celebrating the idea that before the stock market crashed, how invincible the stock market was. And it's true. Before, during, and after World War I, for a long time, Americans were making a ton of money off of the stock market. Here's the Dow Jones Industrial Average from 1921 up until 1929, and then you can see what happens when on Black Tuesday. So here's my example. These are people standing in line to purchase lottery tickets, and you can see that the drawing is worth $550 million. And my argument is that buying stock and buying lottery tickets are sort of, in a way, the same thing, because the more tickets that you purchase, the higher the value of the lottery goes up. Same thing with stock prices. One impact of the stock market crashing and the Great Depression was the building of what they call Hoovervilles, or shanty towns outside the major cities all across the United States. One effect of the Great Depression was a very, very high unemployment rate. As much as 25% of American men and women were out of jobs during the Great Depression. Just to give you an example, during this past recession, Georgia had one of the highest unemployment rates, and it was above 10%. And so in the United States, and so during the Great Depression with a 25% unemployment rate, that's very high. This is an example of a home that an unemployed man and his family might have to live in when they lose their apartment or their home due to a loss of job and that type of thing. You can just see the terrible conditions. This house is in such bad shape they can't even put the cooking stove, the heating stove inside of it for fear that it would burn down. This is not a a good name when it's in reference to Hoover. Hoovervilles were named after the president at that time, before Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a man named Herbert Hoover, a Republican who was very conservative and did not allow the government to do a lot of things to help get us out of the beginning of the Great Depression. And so people blamed Herbert Hoover for the beginning of the Great Depression. This concludes Unit 7, Period 7, Section 8, the causes and the consequences of the Great Depression.